Hi, everybody. Who here is actually planning to eventually found your own project? You? OK. Have you guys actually gone through the thought experiment of thinking, what will happen if I wake up one day, you go launch, you go live, you're being successful, and all of a sudden you get hacked? Like what happens that morning when you find out that people lost money, that everybody's upset with you and your protocol? If you haven't, do it. Hopefully it never happens, but this is one of the reasons why I'm doing this talk. I'm one of the co-founders of Teller. Teller is an oracle. We've been live since 2019. Nothing has been perfect along the way, and it's actually my second startup. My first startup was actually Daxia. It was a decentralized derivatives protocol. And we launched that in 2018 with a centralized oracle because there was really nothing available. Oracleized, that's not provable. It was basically the only thing that was available, and it's super centralized. So after about, I don't know, a year of being Daxia, we're like, OK, now we really have to focus on our Oracle implementation because it's obviously the weakest link in our design. And we couldn't find anything that was available, so we ended up developing Teller for our own use case. And the one thing that was a non-negotiable was decentralization, so we knew it was going to be a little bit slower. But at the time, for decentralized derivatives, at least, we didn't need anything that was too fast. So we came out with our MVP. We ended up getting an investment for that, and now we're Teller. But with that said, as you develop your own protocols, there's three main things that you need to keep in mind when you are actually using an oracle. As a user, you have to be able to define the data that you need and define it in a way that is robust. The second thing that you have to look at is what oracle or oracles and the implementation that you're going to do and include into your system, and do the evaluation based on what you need. And then the third thing is what are the backstops? If everything goes to hell with your oracle, what happens to your users, to their money? How do you settle? Because those are three different parts of your design it's at the end of the day, they hack your protocol. It's going to be your fault, no matter whose fault it is. If you're the CEO, if you're the co-founder, it's going to be your fault. Anyway, so moving on to something happier. I'm sure this is a very technical conference, so I'm assuming everybody knows what the Oracle problem is. There's a lot of oracles out there. We all try to do the same thing, basically bring off-chain data on-chain. And now, more recently, there have been more talk about the Oracle-less DeFi and how basically you're trying to find price discovery on-chain. And honestly, I think that was the initial goal that we all had. It's like, you know what? Everything's going to be independent. It's going to be a completely separate system from what the traditional system offers. And then along came all of these centralized exchanges. And the moment that they basically list your token, so we have TRB, the moment Binance and Coinbase listed us, the majority of our liquidity, just everybody moved there. So now, even if you wanted to do price discovery on chain, it's harder because people just like the convenience, and they're great for onboarding people that are not as familiar with Web3 as some of us that are more technical. But it creates this disconnect. Like our original design was like, everything's on chain, everything's going to be independent. We're going to be able to survive with or without the traditional system, and hopefully bring some competition so that they continue to serve their actual users and not, abuse or charge extreme fees or whatever it is that we were trying to accomplish. But the whole goal was to have this whole ecosystem that was separate, and then ultimately. There is a lot of price discovery that you could do on-chain, but then honestly, depending on what you're building, that may not even be possible, so you might still need oracles, and even if it's not just for price discovery, maybe you're just doing a different type of query. So this is basically this is a very, very basic example of how oracles are used on chain. And like I said, we bring data that possibly you cannot really create on chain, or data that just makes use cases a little bit more interesting. There's a lot of oracles out there. There's Teller, Witnit, Band, Dia, Chainlink. We all work a little bit different, but ultimately we're just trying to bring off-chain data on chain. And who is the best protocol to use on your system is going to depend on what you actually need. And a lot of people leave this to the end of their design because you're focused on your cool protocol, right? You're focused on what you want to build. And this is just one part of it. But ultimately, it's such a big part of security that you have to go through this thought experiment. Otherwise, you end up having unintended consequences. These are just 3 examples of things that have happened in the space that, 2 of these were not even malicious attacks. They were just, it just happened. Oops, how do I go back? They just happened. Like, Black Thursday had a lot of unintended consequences for Maker, right? Just because gas prices were so high and they couldn't get their Oracle to update fast enough. And then, Jesus, this is like trying to get me to move faster. And then the BCX hack was actually a malicious attack where they took a flash loan to manipulate the Oracle and then use Tornado Cash to take the money and leave, and it was all in like an atomic transaction. It was actually 2 hacks. So because they moved so quickly, they settled everything so quickly, there was no way, not even a fork could save them. Once the money is gone, the money's gone. And then Synthetics, it wasn't really a hack either. That was actually they were using one single API for their price feed, and the API all of a sudden started reporting 3 extra zeros. And that led to a bunch of liquidations. Luckily, it was a bot, and they worked out with the bot owner, and they got most of the money back, if not everything. And so the first thing we're going to go through is I'm going to give you a framework as for when you're actually designing your own protocol, how to think about these 3 different aspects of your design. First one's going to be data definition. Obviously, no matter which Oracle you end up using, you're going to have to tell them what it is that you need. And hopefully, they'll be willing to help you come up with a robust definition. How often do you need it? What sources do you need them from? And whether or not you want to actually specify the sources. And I'm going to go into that a little bit in the next slides. But guys, this is OK, and then what type of aggregation you may need, from different exchanges, volume weighted averages. Like, what is it that's going to make it harder to actually attack the actual asset? And then, obviously, like, if you're trying to secure billions of dollars with an asset with a really low market cap or very low liquidity and just listed in like one exchange, that's probably not going to work. So you just have to think about those things when you're starting to define your data for any Oracle. This is not, you haven't even decided which Oracle you're going to use, but you do have to decide this no matter what. And obviously, if you do decide to provide specific APIs and a very specific calculation and aggregation for what you need, then you also have to think about what happens, what kind of outlier detection system do you want? Because what happens if an API comes down? What happens if the API, since you don't control it, they change what they're actually providing, or they happen to be testing something and report 3 extra zeros? And what happens if the API provider bans you from using it, or you reach rate limits with them? What happens if you don't actually get the data? And then also, in terms, if you are using an asset, because right now, let's be honest, most oracles, what we're providing on chain, it's some sort of pricing, pricing information. But if you are doing that, going back to how can it actually be manipulated and what's the cost of it versus what it is that you're trying to secure is going to be super, super important. And then these are some of the ways that you can sort of mitigate the risk of this type of attack. if you do decide to provide specific API sources, you also have to be mindful that you're basically providing a target. You're providing an attack target, basically. And that's fine, especially if you don't have a lot of range for volatility within the information that you need, or if it's a very specific type of asset that is not listed everywhere. It's not like you're asking for the price of ETH or Bitcoin. I think more generally, that's going to have smaller margins, and no matter where people get this information from, it's probably going to be very close because it's so highly liquid and so broadly available. But that's something that you have to keep in mind. If you are using like CoinGecko or like some of these type of information APIs, they already do some of their own aggregation. So you need to understand how they actually work and what they actually include or can exclude, because it will affect you directly. Jesus. And then obviously, what type of aggregations do you want? Nobody should have ever used a spot price. That is something that in traditional system, there's plenty of literature of how you can define robust pricing mechanisms, because a spot price can easily be manipulated. It's just Ethereum or Bitcoin, or you don't really reach finality until like a few blocks later. And that's because it just makes it more expensive as time goes by to actually break a system for that much longer. It's one of the reasons Coinbase makes you wait 7 to 10 confirmations, right, before they actually say, like, yeah, you have that money and you can spend it. Now, in terms of the Oracle protocol, these are some of the, you have to evaluate them based on the characteristics that you need for your protocol to work properly. And that's going to be different based on whatever you're building. And I'll give you an example that I really liked from Rick Pardo from Liquidity. He actually went and did like this infographic that I'm going to show next, and went through like all of the different oracles, and based on what they needed and what they thought was important, then he went back and say, like, these are the trade-offs that I'm willing to make, and then this is the actual structure that we're actually going to use as our oracle. And I thought it was really, like, I have not seen anybody else do that, honestly, since 2018, actually. So it was pretty nice to see that people are actually thinking about this. When you're actually evaluating a protocol based on how they work now, you have to be very mindful of, like, you can, if they're upgradable, you can plan for every attack vector that they have at this moment, but if they're upgradable, and they change how they work, that can have an effect on your security. So that's something that you have to keep in mind, and you have to say, like, what is upgradable? How does it really have an effect in my security? What is their process? Do you have enough time to react? If it's going to take a year for them to like vote on it on a DAO, that's cool. Maybe you can react. You can do V3 and either take them out or address whatever it is you need to address so that you don't get hacked. Do they have an admin key or a multi-sig? What can they actually control, and does it really have an effect on your security? And then obviously liveness. What happens if they go away? What happens if you don't get any data? Like, what happens if the team gets sanctioned by the SEC or the CFTC? What happens to your protocol? This is the infographic that Rick came up with. I'm really sad they're not going to be using Teller, but we never negotiate on decentralization, and so we are a little bit slower. But we are deploying Teller layer next year, and that's going to allow us to reach consensus a lot faster. But this is basically his way of analyzing what oracle worked best for them, and I love it. I mean, everybody, the fact that he went specifically the things that they needed and what was acceptable, or what basically those the green, yellow, those color-coded, basically it's like, what are the things that I'm willing to trade off? Because there's no perfect oracle, but there are some things that you might be willing to do trade-offs on. Anyway, that's his Twitter. If you go there, he has a whole feed on it. The way that I've seen in the last few years people handle this type of risk is basically by implementing either multiple oracles and aggregating them on chain, or using fallback oracles. So when you use a multiple oracle structure, what you need to remember is that you cannot put all your eggs in one basket. Because if you choose 3 different oracles, they're going to have different attack vectors or different ways of working, which is great, because then like for somebody to break your feed, they're going to have to pay a lot more money, right? Because now pay a lot more money, it's going to be more expensive, and it's going to be a little bit more technically difficult to achieve. But if you have all of the 3 oracles providing information from the same 3 APIs, and the API comes down, none of your oracles are going to work. No matter how, because then it's your data definition that is lacking. So it's like, don't put all your eggs in one basket. If you use different oracles, you vary your definition. They can overlap, but at a very minimum, use extra or different APIs so that if one oracle cannot get that information, then the other 2 can, or 5, or however many you decide to use. Then the other implementation that I've seen is using the fallback oracles, where because they want either something faster, they might implement one oracle as a primary, and then do triggers to fall back to a slower oracle or to something that they believe would provide them some sort of liveness guarantee. So here, the trick is the triggers, because that's basically where the attack vectors can come in. So this is something that you have to really sit down and think about, because those triggers is that if you don't do them correctly, that's where the weaknesses can come in. And then within your protocol, so this is you just going through defining your data, providing a really robust definition that it makes it very, very expensive to manipulate the asset. Then looking into the oracles, determining what actually works for you. And then the third part of that is like, what happens if everything goes to hell? What kind of backstops am I going to actually implement within my design? What happens to your users' assets? And some of the things that we've actually seen in practice have been implementing a delay. Maker has a delay to use their oracle of 1 hour. You can freeze the system. I know Maker can freeze their system, and they did that when the whole Black Thursday happened. You can also limit the change of the asset within your protocol, or trigger a freeze based on maybe liquidations. But all of this you have to plan beforehand, obviously, before you launch. And limiting the asset, the change of an asset sounds like a good idea because it can limit the losses, but it also limits the gains. And not all users are going to be thrilled about that. So be transparent. And then a fork. So a fork only works if you didn't actually settle and they didn't take the money into Tornado Cash and left. If they are allowed, if they're able to do that, then you're out of luck. Not even a fork is going to save you when that happens, right? So, but with a delay, like let's say if you had a delay implemented where they cannot withdraw within, 7 days of some sort of dispute. Something that, it's 7 days of some sort of dispute. Then that gives you the ability to maybe fork, and as long as you, even if you don't have checkpoints included in your token, you can probably go back through events and to go and figure out their balances and sort of fork the bad actors out of the system. But all of this, you have to think before you launch, and it has to be part of your design for your own protocol, even though it has to do with the Oracle design or the Oracle implementation. Okay, I have 1 minute. This is basically a cheat sheet of, there's basically your protocol can be, or in terms of the Oracle, it can be, and the option vulnerabilities are going to be on your data source and your data definition. These are some of the ways that you can sort of mitigate the risk of that. And then for the on-chain oracles, obviously, evaluating them, taking the time to evaluate them before you implement them. And then the second thing is what kind of structure do you want to use? And whether, it's obviously, like I said, the goal will be for every type of price discovery to happen on chain. That will be amazing. that, unfortunately, I think that for some use cases it's going to be great. If for some use cases it's going to be just impossible. And that's just for personal experience. I remember thinking, like, it was great. It was amazing when Coinbase and Binance listed us. But then it was like, wait a minute. Like, now there's like no liquidity outside of those exchanges. They have basically all of our, or the majority of our tokens. And that's great. But then now it kind of limits some things. And with that, I'm done. So I have, you guys have any questions? Happy to.
Hello, everyone. Yes, I can see the gentleman at the back.
Thanks for the talk. I think it was great. And we're designing a DeFi protocol, so very, very relevant. How do you balance security with lack of service interruption? What I mean is, let's say you use VWAP or TWAP to get aggregated prices, but then if the market moves and the volatility is too high, or if there is a flash crash, then people not going to be able to, execute transactions. So, like, what's the right balance there?
I think that's something that as a designer, that would be your balance, or the trade-off that you have to make, depending on what you're trying to use or how fast you want to make your protocol. But I cannot tell you it should be 50, like. I cannot give you a number because it shouldn't depend on us. It depends on you and what you think your users want and their risk profiles are. And I think as long as you're transparent with what they're actually getting into, it should be, whatever you decide should be fine. That's what's going to define the risk profile of your market. But I don't know that I can tell you, like, do it like this, and yeah. I mean, if you look at Rick's chart, like he's one of the biggest examples of like actually sitting down and going through the thought process of what they're willing to, or how they're willing to manage that risk. But then they decide what they want to do. So but look at that. Rick Pardo, I might be mispronouncing his last name, but he's from Liquidity. He has a whole, and I can give you, he also did a talk on it on the Blockchain Oracle Summit in Paris. And yeah, sorry, I can't give you a straight answer.
Okay, just take one more question at the back.
Hey, thanks. Great presentation. I just had a question on the part of like off-chain data and like making sure that you have multiple data sources. How precisely would you do that currently? Because most of the Oracle projects either don't tell you where the data comes from or don't give you the means to verify it. So if you use them, you don't know what's under the hood. So how do you make sure that it's more than one API, for instance?
Okay, so I know at least for Band and for us, you are able, as the user, you are able to provide a definition. And for Teller, it's always publicly available because that's how we allow anybody to initiate disputes on the validity of the data. So the way that it works for Teller is the definition is available on IPFS for everybody to know what to report and what is being reported. As the user, you will be like the owner of that data specification, and you get to decide what's in there. And that's where also you have to make this trade-off of like, if I provide specific APIs and specific aggregations, then I'm also providing a honeypot or a vector of attack. But that's why you make it so robust that it will make it very, very expensive for somebody to go attack the asset. And then, or if you do it the opposite direction, where you're a lot more vague and don't give specific APIs, like you're just like the price of ETH USD, get it wherever you want to, then now people don't know what to be a target, what to attack. So then now it's, you're still going to get your price, but that also depends on the type of asset that you are using. Because if it has very, very small or low liquidity, and it's just listed on one exchange, or it's just on Uniswap, and the market cap's really low, then you're setting yourself up for a cap of security cap based on the value of that asset. And that's a trade-off that you do, at least like I said, for Taylor, for Witnet, for Band, you're able to specify what you want, or you're able to just say, like, I just want this. But you should be able to know what you're getting.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, please let's put our hands together for Brenda. Thank you very much.